Welcome to Blueprint for Life, the podcast designed to encourage, uplift, and challenge you on your journey. In just a moment, we will be joined by our host, Elder Lawrence McCarter. We are thrilled you are willing to join us on this transformational ride. At Blueprint for Life, we believe each of us has a unique blueprint crafted by God Himself. This podcast will explore how to discover and unlock that blueprint, allowing you to live a life of purpose, fulfillment, and joy. Through insightful conversations, thought-provoking interviews, and biblical truths, we will delve into the keys that can unlock your potential. Together, we will navigate the challenges, setbacks, and triumphs that come our way, always relying on the timeless wisdom found in God's Word. Now, let's get started with this episode of Blueprint for Life. Here's Elder McCarter.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's me, Lawrence, again, Blueprint for Life. I am so glad to be with you guys one more time. We at the end of September. It's crazy. It seems like the year just started, and here we are staring down the first part of the end of the quarter, or the last quarter of the year, man. It's crazy. But it has been an interesting year. It's been an interesting year, y'all. And it's getting even more interesting. You know, this is an election year, and it's, I don't know, for those of you who pay attention to politics and how things are affecting us, it's wild. You know, we just had a debate not too long back, and that was interesting, to say the least. I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on, Democrat, Republican, Independent, what have you, whether you care or don't care. That was interesting. But, you know, I think that if you kind of just begin to really look around and consider some of the things that are going on in the world around us, and then just look at our country, man, just look at the country as it stands. There's a lot going on that really, honestly, we really could afford to take a few steps back and consider just how we've managed to get here. Seriously, how in the world did we manage to get here, like to this place? And in my preparation for this particular podcast, man, I really started to just kind of consider that question, like, how in the world did we get here? And there's a lot of things that have been coming up in the news and in social media, and in just how we have, as a collective in this country, begun to just understand who we are and where we've come from, and all of these things just kind of thrown together. And just as Christians in general, there's a lot that we have to not only just answer for, but I think there's a lot that we need to understand, because a lot of it is going to dictate how we are seen, not only in the future by, you know, future generations, but how we see ourselves and how we're eventually judged. There's a lot that you can say about the state of Christianity, especially the state of Christianity in the West. And not a lot of it is good, but in a lot of cases, when you start to have that conversation about patriotism, and even more so about things like Christian nationalism, especially here in the United States, that is a conversation that can get to be pretty sticky. And the reason that I say it can get to be pretty sticky is people tend to get really touchy when you start trying to talk politics, man. When you start trying to talk about Democrats versus Republicans versus independents versus, it's almost like you're trying to talk about their parents or favorite relative or something. People take that stuff real serious. But then you have to start to try to address whether or not faith has a place in politics or in patriotism in general, whether or not Christians can be patriotic. There's a larger conversation that can be had about that. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I just kind of want to talk about it because these are conversations that I think we've avoided. And not because it's not something that we should talk about. Honestly, I think it's something that we should talk about. I think that those conversations get avoided because people are too afraid to offend, especially nowadays. There was a time where we weren't so touchy. I think this particular generation nowadays, boy, people have gotten so touchy. So, I don't know. It's like so easily offended. But there was a time where we could actually debate one another and walk away and still be somewhat friendly, at least. But I don't know. Something happened. And now everything's personal. But let's consider, can a Christian be patriotic? I think the long and short of it is, yeah, but it depends on proper perspective, or whether you can maintain proper perspective. Now, for those of you who are new, I've said this I don't know how many times, and those of you who aren't have probably heard me say this a lot of times. Words have meaning. And I think it's very important for, if you're going to have a conversation about anything, you need to make sure that you're on the same page so that you can have a good conversation, so that you can make sure that you're both on the same page about what it is that you're talking about. Because if I have my own personal understanding and you have your own personal understanding and neither of us is on the same page, then there's going to be misunderstandings. So it's important for us to both make sure that we're on the same page when it comes down to our understanding of a particular word or phrase, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Patriotism, by the definition that I'm going by, is a devoted love, support, and defense of one's country. That's what I understand patriotism to be. Now, I served in the United States military, Air Force to be specific, and I was full of all kinds of patriotic fervor. I joined the military, and this was not too long after 9/11, and I wanted to serve my country, and I went in and had every intention of spending a good chunk of my life in the military. That was my intent. That was my plan. Now, did it play out like that? Not quite. But my reasoning for serving my country was because I was patriotic. I love my country. Now, do I always agree with my country? No. But that is part of the heart of what makes a person patriotic. Because to be patriotic does not always mean to agree with your country, but you love your country. You love what your country is, and you love what your country can be. And you love your country enough to challenge your country to be the best that it can be. But then we have this concept that has bounced in and out of the public square throughout history called nationalism. And nationalism is the belief that one's country is superior to all others. And see, this carries a connotation of distrust or disapproval of other nations. Now, see, there was a time where patriotism and nationalism were kind of considered to be synonyms. But nowadays, we kind of see that essentially nationalism is the dark side of patriotism. Because, see, where patriotism looks and covers the love of a person's country and the fact that you want to support your country and you want to see your country be the best that it can be, nationalism would require you to have essentially a blind love for your country and to only see it in the best possible light. And then on top of that, to despise every other country for no other reason than it's not your country. Back to my question, should a Christian be patriotic? Again, it's possible to be, but again, you have to maintain proper perspective, because having love for your country, it's important. It gives a sense of belonging, a sense of this is where I live, this is where I'm from. But on the other hand, to take it too far is to make your country an idol. And God said, I shall have no other God before me. So when you take that love too far, now it becomes a problem. Now, Romans 13 chapter, the 1st through the 7th verse, instructs us that we are to be subject to the governing authorities and to honor them, even when they're not honorable. Patriotism is going to require us to honor our governing authorities. Okay? That's part of patriotism. But it's also biblical. In God's word, we're called to submit ourselves to those that are over us. Because you have to remember that those that are in these positions of authority didn't get there on their own. God permitted them to be in these positions of authority. So the reason that someone is able to be in this position is because God permitted it. But just because God permits it does not mean that the person that he allowed to be in that position just gets off scot-free. Because if they manhandle it, if they mishandle it, God is also going to be the one to hold them accountable for the mishandling. But you also have to remember that we live in a constitutional republic where the citizenry, that means you and me, we have the potential to impact our own governance. That's also a part of our responsibility when we honor the authority that's placed over us. What do I mean when I say that? Part of honoring the authority that's over us is participating in the process. So we honor our government. We honor the authorities that's placed over us by participating in the process. So we're given the opportunity to vote. Take the opportunity. Participate in the political process. Because you have that ability, participate in it. Not all countries give you that ability. There are some countries that, unfortunately, the citizenry does not have access to those same rights. And yet God still calls on them to honor the ones that are in authority over them, even though they are not honorable. 1 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, 1st through the 4th verse, Paul wrote for us to pray for those in authority over us, that we may, and I quote, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life. Now, I'm going to express an unpopular opinion here for a moment. People get so bent out of shape and crying about, oh, they took prayer out of schools. Boo-hoo. First of all, they only managed to take prayer out of schools because folks stopped praying at home. Okay? If people would have been praying at home, then it would have been that much more difficult for Satan to come against prayer in public places like schools and courthouses. Not only that, let's be realistic for a moment. I know they pushed everything down. What was that, Louisiana? They got all excited because they managed to get the Ten Commandments put back up in the courthouses down in Louisiana. Okay, big whoop. You managed to get the Ten Commandments put back up in the courthouse. Great. But if that's as far as you go, it's of no benefit. Because, again, the Ten Commandments are great, but if you're not following them, let's be honest, the courthouse is where you have the largest congregation of paid liars you'll ever find. And yet, you want to put a document on the wall where one of those commandments says, "Thou shalt not lie." And then, oh no, they're not lying. They're just twisting the truth. That's lying. Okay? If you don't tell the truth, it's a lie. I don't care how you try to manipulate it. Anything that isn't the truth is a lie. Let's just be completely black and white about it. Even if it hits me, I'm going to be completely honest. If I'm not telling the truth, I'm telling a lie. That's all it is to it. If you say, "Thou shalt not steal," I can't say, "Well, I didn't steal it, I borrowed it." If you find me in possession of something that does not belong to me, even if I only had it momentarily, at the time that I had it, because it did not belong to me, I stole it. It's pretty cut and dry. I don't know any other way to explain it. Like you can try to break down into semantics and try to say, oh, it could be under these circumstances, and that's what's wrong with our legal system today. That's part of the reason why it's so janky now, because we have come up with so many ins and outs, but we won't follow the first 10. And some people are like, oh, that's Hammurabi's code. I don't care what you call it. There were 10 basic laws, and we still couldn't follow them. So what makes you think that posting them on the wall is going to be any better? Like that's some kind of great victory. Putting them on the wall is not going to make you any less guilty of it. Now, let me get off that topic before somebody starts sending me hate mail. Anyway, now, with the rise of Christian nationalism, you have some people who have begun to question whether or not the founding fathers were actually Christian. And while many believe that the founding fathers held orthodox Christian beliefs, some of their more private writings allude to their actually having been deists. Now, before you get your pants all in a twist, I'll explain. Deists believe, as a philosophical position, that God was essentially a clockmaker deity. And what I mean by that is this. To the extent of scientific rationale, God basically made everything that exists. And like any good clockmaker, once he finished making everything, he wound everything up so that it would spin very nicely on its own. Then he closed the back, sealed it up, and left it to run on its own, with no further input from him. Just left. So in other words, with the universe, he made it, made sure everything was spinning like it was supposed to, and then he walked away. No further input, no effort from him on his behalf, for our behalf, or otherwise. So in other words, the idea that we need a savior, oh no, toss that. That's bunk. The idea that sin is a thing, oh no. We're generally just moral beings. The idea that, that we were born in sin and that we are inherently evil beings. Oh no. We're all good people from the very beginning. Sometimes we just do things that aren't necessarily good. So essentially they deny everything that Christianity stands for. Now, only reason I bring that up, I'm not bringing that up to debate what is or isn't, or what was or wasn't on the founding fathers' minds or anything like that. I'm only bringing that up to point out that they likely were not Christian nationalists, or even what the Christian nationalists romanticize them as having have been. That's number one. And number two, I bring it up to remind folks that they were pursuing the same religious freedoms that Christian nationalists are now trying to deny folks today. I would like to be very, very clear. Allow me to state unequivocally that Christian nationalism is not, nor has ever been, nor will ever be Christian. Because to be Christian nationalist, you have to deny what is Christian. Because, see, to be Christian means to be Christ-like, right? I mean, that's what Christian means, right? To be Christ-like. And yet, to be a Christian nationalist, or rather to be a Christian, or claim to be a Christian who is a nationalist, which means the belief that one's country is superior to all others, and to take it even further, to believe that your particular group is superior to all others. But Jesus said that we are to love our enemies as ourselves, which becomes very, very difficult to do if you despise, distrust, and disapprove of everyone else except for your group. It makes that very, very hard to do. The issue that we run into, or rather I should say the danger of Christian nationalism, is that this is a philosophy that seems to become, or have become, more and more and more pervasive within this country, and it's teaching a set of dangerous lies. Not even just half-truths, but dangerous lies that has seeped into the fabric of the church. And people have become convinced that somehow to be this quote-unquote Christian nationalist lines up with faith in Jesus Christ. That somehow the idea that we're going to take this country back to its Christian roots, which I would first and foremost argue that this country doesn't have Christian roots. That's the beginning of it. That's the beginning of the conversation. But to claim that you want to take this country back to Christian roots that it does not have, and that you want to go even further as to despise everyone who does not look like you, sound like you, speak the same language as you. The rhetoric that gets taught by, again, quote unquote, Christian nationalists is a hateful rhetoric, one that teaches separation and segregation far more than it teaches love and tolerance, which is what Jesus taught. Now, did Jesus say that we were to accept any and everything? Oh no. Because he said that I am the truth, the way, and the life. Anyone that comes to the Father must come by me. So that was very clear. And I don't want anybody to mistake that. Jesus is the only way that we will see God in peace. But on the other hand, he was not about compelling or forcing people to serve him. He wanted us to serve him willingly. So why is it that we seem so bent on forcing the citizens of this country that we claim is a Christian nation to bend the knee, so to speak? Where do we get off? Trying to do something that not even Jesus compelled people to do. I don't get it. But I guess maybe, like the old folks say, we'll understand it better by and by. One can only hope, right?
Hey there, fellow listeners. As we wind down another inspiring episode of Blueprint for Life, we want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can always find more uplifting content and past episodes on our website, blueprintforlifepodcast.com, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Join us next time for more faith-filled conversations and stories that fuel your spirit. Until then, stay blessed and keep shining your light.